Okay, so has anyone got anything they want to share or ask today? No?
I had in mind something to ask, but I'm now trying to dig it up, and it's quite buried deep in my memory. I'll just keep searching for it first.
Okay. Hiya.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. All right, well, we're just starting, so if anyone wants to share anything, ask anything, testify to anything, now's the time. Be great. Hi, Christine.
In one of the hands, you said that about not wanting to know what's on your scroll of testimony, just take it day by day and present yourself as a living sacrifice. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah.
The desire not to know, just trusting.
Well, it's. I'm not saying we shouldn't know what's on our scroll. I think it's the reason we need to know. We have to assess, and I don't believe God wants you to see everything on your scroll for everything that's on it all in one go, because I think the temptation would be to try and figure it out. Now, there may be people that God can entrust with that level of information and revelation. And so I know some people have said, oh, they've seen this scroll and they saw the day that they were going to die or something like that. For me, it's like, do I really want to see that? Okay. And I know someone else said, oh, they saw that and then it changed, and God gave them another 40 years or something.
That was Grant Mahoney.
Yeah, Grant Mahoney or something. For me, it's like, I've seen various events on my scroll as God has shown me them. When I've encountered them, it's helped me recognize that this was part of my destiny and not to avoid it or but I know every day when I go before the ark of the presence of God and I open my heart for Him to reveal my destiny, then I know I'm going to be drawn towards it. And ultimately, I'm only responsible to do today. And I think a lot of people, it says, okay, well, if I'm doing today, does it help if I know where I'm going? Yeah, but I think some of that will be who you are, your identity, knowing that you have 7 mountains and you have spheres of government. All those things are things that God will reveal to you. It's the day-to-day thing that I think is the key, not to try and, oh, well, I'm thinking about tomorrow's things before I've dealt with today's. That's not to say that I don't know that in the future I have things that are part of my destiny, and I know in general what those are part. I know I'm going to be part of a city of refuge. I know I'm being part of different things because I know that's part of my destiny. But today, I don't need to be concerned about those things other than what I'm authorized to today. So if God authorized me today to begin to call forth next year, then I could do it because it was part of my destiny today. If I was like, oh, I need to sort out next year and I have to do it because if I don't do it, then I'm operating in fear, and that's never going to work. So I think there are lots of things that I've seen. When I first saw my scroll, I saw almost like a cover picture that sort of related to generally my life and what I'm called to be part of. And for me, it was a big ship. That's what I saw on the sort of as almost like an overshadowing picture of my life. it was like to be involved in this large ship, which was like a cruise liner, but it wasn't for pleasure. Well, it was for pleasure, but it was also for other things. So, and there was no crew and passengers. Everyone was just together on this large ship, and I saw things like, you know, scrambling nets being put down off the ship that people could clamber up with, and the ship was at dock. And then I saw boats going off from the ship, like lifeboats, and then coming back. And then I saw a helicopter on the pad, and then I saw a big dish. You know, and at the time I didn't sort of like, oh, I need to understand what all these are. I just saw it. But then when certain things have taken place in my life, then I refer to that. Like, I didn't know why it needed a huge satellite dish on this ship until I started to connect with people all over the world. You know, then I saw, oh, that's what that's about. What I didn't do was go to God and say, right, I need to know what that is, because I want to, you know, I recognized it, and then I just knew when I began to engage it. And then the ship actually started to move. It came out of dock. You know, and a lot of these things have, you know, and that's when I, you know, started to do some traveling. And that for me is part of how this gets unveiled. You know, I remember also having someone invited me to go and do a conference with them, and in fact it was up in Guildford, and a few years ago, and I was like, do I really want to do that? It's like, you know, I'm not really sure, because, you know, and then someone came to me here and said, oh, I had a dream, and in this dream, this is what I saw. I saw this ship, and it was sort of connected to this helicopter, and it was going, and it was dropping this ship onto a tributary of the Thames. You know, so I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I went and looked up the Thames and the tributary of Thames, and found Guildford was on a tributary of the Thames. So for me, that was a confirmation of something that I was pretty much sort of like, well, I'm not really sure, and really my soul really didn't want to bother. But then once I had that confirmation, it was like, no, this is in line with what God has shown you as part of your destiny, therefore you need to say yes. You know, and I did. You know, and in saying yes to this, that then opened up the other things. If I'd said no to that, then some of the other things I'm doing wouldn't have opened up, because I wouldn't have taken the step to have actually fulfilled my destiny in that area. So, you know, for me, that's how I particularly engage. You know, I've seen the scroll of my destiny opened, and I've seen certain events on it, and then I've recognized them when I've come about them. But I'm not really bothered, in a sense, to try. I don't have to go and find out. I know that God is unveiling it to me, and I know my spirit will lead me towards it, and I know my heart will align myself with the heart of God when I present myself to God every day. You know, and I know the general course of what that is involved with in my life, and that will keep me on track. You know, I know it isn't part of my destiny to go and live in, I don't know, Mongolia or something. You know, so I wouldn't do it. You know, because I know it's not part of my destiny. It's not something that God has revealed. God has revealed to me that I need to stay here physically. You know, and that was part of, because He called me to have an investment in the land here, and part of what I'm doing is to help outwork some of the other things that I've seen. But, you know, until I dealt with the need to know, then I didn't know a lot. And when I dealt with the need to know, then God was free to give me a lot more. And so I don't need to strive for anything. It's not to say I don't have a desire for everything on my scroll to be outworked, and, you know, for me to be obedient, but I only need to take it one day at a time. And I think for a lot of people, if you concern too much about what happened yesterday or the day before, and you carry that, you know, and if you're too much concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow and the day after, then I think you will run out of resource, because you'll be using up what God's given for you today on too much thinking about yesterday and tomorrow. So long as what I'm doing today is in alignment with where my destiny is going, then that's the important thing. You know, and I instinctively know, my spirit knows who I am and what I'm called to do, and I recognize it. You know, and when my soul was more involved, then I needed more help from other people. You know, and I, you know, in what we're doing here, you know, with being part of a bench of 3, you know, I've submitted my life to the other 2 in that bench, and I'm very happy for them to be part of, you know, making decisions that are not just for me personally, because, you know, I don't need someone else to tell me what to do in my own house or whatever. But when it comes to the destiny that we're corporately responsible for, then I'm submitted to that, and you know, part of my life is entwined with that, because, you know, that's part of the destiny that God showed me. You know, so, you know, originally, then I would, you know, I asked that bench of 3, I asked the 2 of them to, you know, when I became a decision about should I go here or shouldn't I go there, you know, I asked for their input into that. And it would be, well, what's your spirit saying to you? Well, my spirit is sort of saying, yeah. My soul is saying, no. Well, what am I going to obey, my spirit or my soul? Well, until I get to the point where my soul wasn't in charge, then I was asking then for more insight into that. So, you know, take the decision out of my hands, because I'm likely to say no at this point. Whereas now I'm much more in tune with knowing, you know, where I fit into certain things. So, for instance, you know, I'm going to the US in April, and I know that was part of the vision for government being established in the US that God gave me on New Year's Eve 2014, which I started to fulfill last year. So when someone invited me to come to the Northwest last year, I knew it was part of that aspect of the revelation God gave me. So there was not sort of a, oh, does this fit in with my destiny or not? I knew it was, because God had called me to help establish some governmental things. You know, so when it was this year an invitation to go into the Southwest, I knew it was part of that. So it wasn't any sort of, you know, I'm not being clear about it. I knew, because my spirit already resonated with God's will in that, and therefore it was very easy to identify that this was part of God's will in it. You know, and then I got invitations to go into other places in the US that I said no to, because they weren't in alignment with what God had shown me. So I felt very clear to say, actually, that's not what God is calling me to do right now. You know, but when I actually sought him about it, he said, but it will be. So I'm very happy to, you know, submit things into my life, because, you know, God said to me, once you establish the perimeter, then you can engage the spine and the heart. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. You know, and I'll then, when I recognize what that means, because, you know, what does that mean? You know, it could mean 100 things, you know, but when I sort of, I will recognize what that will mean when the time's right. You know? And I think that's a key to everything in these things, is making sure that we're being led by the Spirit, joined to God, and only doing what we see him doing. You know, and I think that's the important thing. You don't need to strive then. You know, I enjoy my day, because I know I'm in the purposes of God in my day. You know, but I do frame it and establish it at the beginning of my day, so that then I am, you know, bringing government into my circumstances and the circle that's around me and my spheres, because I choose to administrate that from heaven. You know, and I do set up those spheres by expanding my spirit around them, and then beginning to see a flow into that. You know, because the heavens can flow into me, but if it doesn't go anywhere through me, then it's going to stagnate, because it's not for me. It's for me being a channel to reach other people. You know, because that's why freely I've received, freely I need to give. So I established that by expanding my spirit to go around the spheres that I've got influence in, and then I can release that river of life to flow through me into those spheres, which is all part of me establishing the order around my life in terms of government, and then seeing heaven flow through me into it. So I don't sort of like turn up every day and just hope for the best. You know, I establish God's government in it and all the resources and everything I'm going to need for today. And they will always be in alignment with my destiny if I'm doing what God said.
I think Ian said that we all agreed to what was written on the scroll before we came, so we should know instinctively what a general guideline of what there is.
Absolutely, because my spirit, pre-existent in God, before it came into my physical body, and that obviously made up, you know, of my generational line, was in agreement with my destiny. And a lot of people, that draws them towards certain things in their lives, which is a fulfillment of that destiny. For a lot of other people, they get conformed to the world, and particularly to their family line, which sometimes can hinder that destiny. You know, because it's like if your let's say your destiny was to be, I don't know, a doctor, but all your family were lawyers, and you were expected to be part of the family business and the practice, and everything about you was preparing you, you know, you would feel a tension within you, but you may be conformed to that because you weren't sufficiently connected to that, which is why it says in the Word of God that we should bring up a child in the way he should go, and then he won't depart from it. And that's not the way I want my child to go. It's the way God has prepared their destiny, and I want to help them discover that. Then they'll flow with it. Or I can basically try and control them into what I think they should do, which is what a lot of things happens. You know, the world does that. You know, and that's why a lot of people are torn or feel something's missing in their life because they're not fulfilling their destiny. You know, a friend of mine, as a child, was quite creative and, you know, had a gift for music, and, you know, got a guitar and everything else. And then it came to the point where they had to choose what they were going to do in their life, and their parents, this person's parents, really encouraged them to pursue education and get a university degree and do all these things, and because they had a sort of a strong work ethic, and you need to provide and all these things. And this person did that and was quite successful, you know, got on the corporate ladder and was quite high up and had lots of material things, but felt unfulfilled on the inside. And when they got born again, God started to reconnect them with their gift and with what He called them to, and with that creativity and in music. And they got off the corporate ladder. In fact, they demolished the ladder, in a sense, and began to pursue more of that creative side of things, and that brought them closer to God and enabled them to relate to God in a way that they couldn't do before because they were on the wrong path. You know, so I think, yes, there is, you know, Psalm 139 in the scroll of, you know, that's been written, all the days that are ordained for me, absolutely. And my spirit will instinctively have a recollection of that, but when my spirit was separated from eternity and separated from God and separated from my soul, then there's a lot of reconnection to be done, and a lot of restoration and reconciliation to be done for me to come back into the fullness of that. But it will be there. You know, every single person who, you know, has a spirit, and that spirit will have that encoded within it in some way. But because of the separation from God, then the purpose of it gets separated from God's plan and purpose, and doesn't necessarily fully find its outworking. But the more we seek Him in relationship, the more then that gets revealed as we come back home. I understand much more spiritually about that role in eternity and some of the things that I were already doing. See, I think some people think, okay, well, God had a purpose for me in eternity, and my spirit had that purpose, and then I was waiting for me to be born. Well, it wasn't really like that, and there was a sense where we all pre-existed before the planet, and there was a role within the original creation of things that we had. And some people seem to connect more with that, and I believe our destiny will be restoring us back to that role, which is on a wider plane, not limited by Earth. But we need to do what we're supposed to do here first, because that what we do here in this domain indicates how easy it's going to be to do those things in the ages to come. And I think some people will have to do some more preparation in the ages to come in readiness for them to fulfill their eternal destiny. And I believe that will take place. I believe that there will still be growth and maturity even in the ages to come. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in the outer court for some people unless they're able to continue to grow and mature, because there will be a lot of people who will be saved on their deathbed, or God gives people the last possible second to respond to Him, and there will be people who didn't fulfill their destiny here at all, and therefore they've got no record of faithfulness, so they won't get a well done, good and faithful servant. They'll be saved like the thief on the cross. Today you can come with me into paradise, but their whole life was lived without that. So I think there will be people at all different levels of maturity spiritually, and I think that will continue because God doesn't want us not to fulfill who we are. But there are obviously some biblical things that say, like, if you waste your talent here, then your ruling cities there may well be delayed, in a sense. So that it's the main thing is to make sure that we fulfill what we're called to do here, and then continue with that fulfillment in the ages that are coming. Yeah.
What's the effect of praying for people? Like, what effect does it create in the spirit when you pray for people generally?
What do you mean in terms of what effect, in what context?
Like, what happens there when I pray for all those that are not saved, that they may come to know the Lord, when I present that before God in prayer?
Okay, well,
what happens?
Various things can happen. That needs to be within the remit that God's given you. So, I don't think people should just be like, okay, I'm going to pray for all the souls of the world. It's like, no, who has God given you some specific connection to within your spheres of influence that you have government to? Who do you carry in your heart, which gives you authority towards? And if you're calling or praying, I think for me it's like I would rather be thinking about it. I am legislating governmentally on those people's behalf. So I could do a court case on their behalf. I could do things on their behalf. I can call their destiny forth, various things like that, as long as I'm authorized to do so. So I wouldn't have here's my prayer list that I'm just going to go through every day or whatever. It will be, God, what are you inspiring me to do today? You know, who am I called to today? And feeling his heart of love and being moved by love to respond. Now, what happens with those things, depending on what you're doing, if you are calling things forth, then you are issuing a legislative decree that the angelic realm can get behind, that they recognize that and they will respond to that. You can fill up the bowls of the saints. You know, it talks about in Revelation, you know, the whole harp and bowl type thing. Our worship and our prayer fills up certain bowls, and when those bowls are full, they get poured out. So there's a sense of an ongoing perseverance in doing some things. You know, ask and keep asking. You know, knock and keep knocking. You know, sometimes we have to continue persevering. Sometimes there are very clear legal things that you can do by doing a court case standing on behalf of others. But all those people have a free will. And although you are preparing the environment around their life to make it an opportunity for them to respond and engage with God, you can't force anybody. So you're setting an environment and making the conditions better for the light to come into their darkness. And therefore there are other things you can do. I mean, you can, on the premise that the enemy blinds the eyes of those who are perishing, is because they have given the enemy authority to blind their eyes through sin. Because sin is what causes the enemy to have authority in our lives, and therefore if he is blinding the eyes and putting a veil over people so they can't see the truth, it's because of the sin that they commit. So how do we deal with that? Well, Jesus said in John that we can forgive people's sins. Now, forgiving their sins doesn't make them saved, but it does remove the enemy's activity over them that enables the light to penetrate because that veil's removed. Now, the best way to do that is when they're sleeping. Because if you're praying for people that way and releasing forgiveness for their sins while they're thinking, and I'm saying sins rather than sin, because sin is a principle and sins are things people commit. And we can forgive sins, but we can't forgive sin, because that's the nature that they need to engage God with. But removing someone's sins removes the right of the enemy to bring blindness. So if you pray for people regularly, release forgiveness into their sins while they sleep, then all night the Holy Spirit can be at work in their life. They can have dreams, visions, angelic encounters in their sleep, preparing them for the light to penetrate darkness. But the enemy's desire, obviously, is to keep people in darkness. So it's our responsibility to create the environment that light can come. And that may be a testimony of our life, ourselves. You know, let your light so shine before men that they will bring glory to God in heaven. So it may just be more than just a spiritual thing. We may need to do practical things to demonstrate God's love. So lots of different things that you can do. If you're just sort of saying, oh God, will you save those people, then I would suggest that's an old model and is very unlikely to respond to that, because we need to mature and begin to legislate for those people's lives, not just ask God to do the saving. He's calling us to be involved in creating the kingdom and the rule of God so that that salvation can take place.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
That's quite powerful, actually. Thank you so much for that, Mike. I just wanted to share that as you know, I'm on this wonderful journey of becoming more and more aware of the presence of God around me and what He's doing. And a couple of things that I've become more aware of is, one is that, well, I think if I were to be honest about what my underlining prayer was for the Lord to possess my soul. And I think one of the things I've become more aware of is that the Lord just putting a light on anything that has caused me to fear. And as a result of, that fear, obviously, His love can't penetrate in the way that it should.
Yeah.
So I'm obviously learning how to deal with those fears. I think the second thing I've realized, too, is the need to stay unoffendable. And the more I have seen that need, every time I've found myself offended and I go back to why I'm offended, I realize that it's because I had put my faith in that person or that thing or that whatever rather than in God and didn't know. So again, I feel the Lord is stripping away some things. I guess my question in saying all of that is, clearly I'm learning to partner in these areas, but I guess my question is there in your mind, is there a clear process that God does in order to possess our souls?
Okay. I think when it comes to the soul, God's original intention when Adam and Eve were created, God breathed into Adam initially, and he became a living being. And another version says a living soul. So his spirit and soul and body and God were all in relationship and joined in that relationship. So when that got separated, because of sin, obviously there became a fractured sense of who we are. So our spirit is separated. Adam's spirit became separated from his soul. The whole thing changed. And so God wants to bring a restoration of what it originally was. So in dealing with the soul, it's not that God possesses our soul, but our spirit joined to the Lord and becoming one spirit encompasses our soul. And then our soul comes back into alignment, integrated, in unison, in oneness, unity. Lots of words that would describe what it is when spirit and soul are back together as a living being. Now, I don't want to stop at being a living being, because as a son of God, I'm supposed to be a godlike being, so I then need to then still carry on the process of maturing. So when I was looking at this in my own life, obviously engaging the gateways of my soul was the behavioral patterns and spiritual things that had taken root in my soul, which were controlling me and hindering me being led by my spirit, because those were the things that were leading me to draw things from the outside, and that's where all the damage and hurt and all the things came from primarily. Once I began to deal with that and look at dealing with the familiars operating in my soul and be cleansed in a sense, then, for me, I got to a point where I had to do with the fundamental essence of who God had created me to be, his personality. Because I found that I had no problem when God said, here's this sin, repent. It was like, this is a hindrance to our relationship, so let's get rid of that. I don't want that. But when he started to put his finger on the very essence of who I was, that's when it became more difficult to differentiate between that which he's created me to be redemptively, so my redemptive gift, the way my soul is wired up, and then how I've used how my soul's wired up for independence. And in my own life, I dealt with the gateways, I presented myself as a living sacrifice, I did the thoughts and intentions of the heart, I looked at all the motives and those things, and that was a process of transformation. But I never really fully became integrated and one until I dealt with what Ian Clayton calls the dragon's well, which is what the enemy has within the very essence of my being, and that he uses and I use to create independence. And what I found for me, that was my redemptive gift is prophet, teacher, so I'm wired to find things out, figure out things, understand things, see how things work, how to explain them. That's how I'm wired up to think. I solve problems, I find solutions. As a kid, I always wanted to take things apart and find out how they worked. That's who he made me as a personality. But I therefore needed to know those things to bring me into a place of security. So when God started to put his finger on that in my life, at the essence of me, I had to surrender that. So to become, as you say, possessed by God possessing my soul, rather than it being a possession and a takeover, it's a surrender and a joining and a oneness that takes place. And for me, I had to go through, I've shared this many times, going through, a 4-month period of not knowing anything, of him not telling me anything, for that area of my soul to be exposed and for me to die, to that, and to the need to know, and to the need to have all the information and figure it all out so I would trust God. That was the key. I needed to trust God when I didn't know, and that meant I wasn't going to use how he had wired me up to be to order and control my own life. So there are processes, in a sense, different levels. You look at the behavior and you deal with the behavior. You then deal with the thoughts and intentions, the motives of that behavior, which includes iniquity and familiar spirit. You may look at your genetic makeup of what is there fear encoded within for you, your DNA as epigenetic factors that are triggered. So you can go lots of different levels, but you still have to deal with the very essence. This is who he made me to be as a soul, and I'm completely surrendered to my spirit. My spirit now is joined to my soul, and I'm now feeling whole. So there's quite a lot of different sort of potential steps to that. My ketubah, when I made my ketubah in 2011, that's what triggered me to have to deal with the performance-orientated side of my soul. Because a ketubah, that marriage contract between us and God, can be very performance-orientated if we're not careful. And it can be very mechanical, and we have to be careful that we don't use that outside of the relationship. So when I made this sort of ketubah, hey, here's my expectations, what that did was identified the soul area that needed all those things to be in place for me to feel secure and safe with God, and therefore feeling surrendered. But I wasn't really surrendering. I was only surrendering in the perspective of what I knew. And when I didn't know, I was, guarded. Those were my defense mechanisms. I need to know. So when God said, be still, I'm not going to tell you anything, you're in the dark cloud here, my soul reacted in such a way. I needed to understand, I needed to know. And everything about the essence of who I was, but which had come from an independence from God, suddenly got highlighted, and then eventually, through this period of 4 months, I yielded and surrendered that. And that made a massive difference to my life, because then, and for me, it was needing to know, which was at the essence of stuff. Ultimately, it is all fear-based. Whatever those things are in each of our lives, it will be fear-based. And people have different redemptive gifts. For someone like me, information was what was the key. For someone who's, let's say, a ruler gift, control would be the key. And because they're supposed to bring rule and government. But when that is not surrendered and submitted in unison, it becomes the thing that they do. I control the situations of my life. And when I'm in control, I feel safe. For me, it's when I have revelation or understanding, I feel safe. So whatever it might be, you may be, I don't know, have different gifts. Someone might be a mercy gift. So them releasing mercy, the danger in that mercy gift is that codependency takes place. And so when God puts the motive will be, well, I feel good about myself when I'm helping somebody. When I'm not helping somebody, How do I feel? But you have to look at what was the motive for me helping someone in the first place. And this really gets down to the very deep essence of the motives of our heart. And I think that's the key ultimately to wholeness in what you're describing as, spirit and soul, my spirit joined to the Holy Spirit, becoming one with my soul and body, and being in complete unison. I become a living being again. But then I need to mature beyond that into a godlike being, because Adam and Eve were perfected to the point they were sinless, but they weren't perfect. They would have still have to have been conformed to the image of sonship, which was would have been an ongoing relational process that God had put in place in engaging the revelation of their ongoing sonship in conformity to God, which we all have to go through.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. I'm laughing because I'm thinking to myself, when you talk about redemptive gift, I think mine is, I need to know. I always want to understand how it works, and hence my question, what's the process? Because the part of my soul that is in turmoil at the moment is the fact that, I've been to heaven a few times, and well, probably more than a few times, and I've seen some things, but then I listen to other people's experience, and I'm thinking, I didn't see that. Can I, there's some specific things, for example, that my heart is longing for. Like, I'd love to meet my children I lost. I would love to be able to just sit with the Lord, ask questions, and learn things that no man can teach me.
Yeah.
I would say those two things are the things that I'm longing for the most. And I just want to get to it. So I'm just like, Lord, and again, as you said, it's, even last night I was saying, Lord, I pray I don't want to know this just to, show off or just to say I know. But I mean, if I were, like I said, if I were to say the two things that's really on my heart, those are the two things. I would love to meet my children, and I really would love for the Lord to teach me some things that only He alone can teach me.
Yeah.
So I would say that's my, and at the moment, in fact, I started off the year with the Lord giving me very clear instructions that this year He didn't want me to go and speak with any notes. He wanted me to go, He will tell me a few times I've actually gone, and He's told me what I'm going to say as I'm taking the mic. And has said to me, do not open your laptop. There's some times I've been better than some, and there are times when I've just been like, Lord, but that's been hard for me. But because, you see, I started off that way where I wasn't using any notes, and then people started asking me for my notes, and I felt like I had to write notes in order to give them notes. And then I became dependent on that. And the way the prophetic gift works in me is quite spontaneous. So the Lord was saying that I was quenching that. I don't know how to explain that. So yeah, I'm learning how to be just more spontaneous and less rehearsed and less, as you said, recognizing that it's something that's made me feel secure, and my security can't be in that. It has to be in the Lord and leaning on Him totally.
Yeah. For me, it's like I was in a situation where I'd had several years of intense revelation and encounters, and God was revealing a lot, and I did sit down with Him, lots of times, and he gave me revelation and stuff. But those were forerunner experiences that brought me to a point of then a level of surrender, which took it to another level, because God was gracious and showed me mercy. And when it got to a point where now you've matured to such a point where you really have to deal with the deeper aspect of this, then and I willingly embraced the process, and I saw it on my scroll of destiny as an event. That whole thing was enabled me to then look at the very issues of my soul, and He put me through the dark cloud. And I think that dark cloud is a place of preparation for engaging God personally. And what he said to me was, be still, which was simple, I thought, until I tried to be still, because my soul would no longer be still, and then he told me to rest. No, wait, next sleep, wait. And it was like, okay, but I needed to know what to wait for, why I was waiting, and all the questions came up. And then eventually rest, which I started to get the point, and then wait expectantly. And all those things were, you can't do anything. This is not for you to try and figure this out, understand it, work it out. It was just be still, wait, rest, wait expectantly. None of those things I could do anything. And none of those things were dependent on me knowing, just trusting. So what it did, it developed a trust in God which wasn't dependent on me doing anything for him or him doing anything for me. And that was the issue. And as soon as that was broken, my spirit and soul, that separated my spirit from my soul and reintegrated it correctly. And it reconnected me with God in a totally different dimension, where now I didn't need to know. He was free to tell me and unveil things. And the revelation that I've received and the experience I've received, since I didn't need to actually have it, is in a multiplied exponential sense from what I was able to receive before. And I thought it was amazing before, but that was God inspiring me, encouraging me to see this is what life can be, but if it's going to be like this, the way it is intended, you need to die. Your soul has to die to independence and being in control. And then, and it was, I don't sort of emphasize this. It wasn't a light process. It was a really hard process for me, because I didn't cotton on to what it was about until 6 weeks into it. Until I got to the point of, oh, this is what you're really saying here, and my soul, my spirit sort of, I recognize this, and I'm willing to surrender. And eventually, I burnt my ketubah, offered it to God, offered everything that was on it, and now it's not based on performance but relationship, and everything from that developed. So rest is the key. Coming out of everything from a place of rest rather than striving or pressing in and all those words that we get encouraged to do. And I understand some of what they are, but actually it's about rest. It's about rest in relationship with God as the primary foundational thing for everything. Then everything else will flow out of it. And that rest can't come on the basis of our soul having its demands met, but out of a trusting relationship with God. Therefore, any of the redemptive nature of who I am, if I need that to make me feel fulfilled, then my fulfillment is in what I'm doing rather than who I am. And who I am is not what I do. I do from who I am, not for it. And everything about where my identity comes from in terms of performance, works, gets challenged in this. Because it's not that I was doing anything wrong at all. Because I was wired to do that. I was just doing it to meet my own need for security and safety. And someone else could rule to do that, someone else could be a giver to do that, someone else could be an exhorter to do that. But if they were getting their identity from what they were doing, then that's where God wants to deal with that major issue in all of us. So we can actually be at rest in our relationship with God, and then that release everything from that. Because it feels great to be at rest. It really does.
Where can we get some information on this redemptive gift? I'd love to explore that a little bit more deeply.
The redemptive gifts are within the Engaging God manual.
You know, I'm yet to access these things, by the way.
Yeah, on the redemptive gift manual, in the teaching on module 1, you'll find in Destiny and redemptive gift there's even a survey you can actually do to look at potentially what your redemptive gifts might be. So that those things are available on the Engaging God manual.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
What I'm personally struggling with is control, because I'm also going through transformation and cleansing the gates, and there's just this the need to be aware of my surroundings, the need to be aware of everything else, that and to know, say, like expenses and everything, and it's so totally tied into my spiritual life that I haven't don't know where to begin to separate it. So it is, I understand what you're saying. It is really, really a struggle. And I just want to get to the other side of, oh, it's over. But I'm like, I don't even know whether I'm dealing with it the right way. But I'm just surrendering it to God. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, please. I don't know what to do with this. Just help.
Yeah, I think it's again resting in the relationship and allowing God to bring that separation from who I am and what I do, so that I'm not doing to be, but I'm being so I can do. And it is a very fine line. It's quite difficult to distinguish it, because what you're doing is not wrong. And that's the problem. If it's like, oh, this is sin, therefore I can easily see I need to stop that. It's actually, this is how God has made me, but I'm using it to create my own security, rather than I have my security in God, and therefore this enables me to outwork who I am. And it's not easy, but it's one of those things that in relationship, if you're asking God to show you, and this really is the essence of separating soul and spirit, and I think Ian Clayton teaches about it, and I think the teaching of it sort of almost makes it sort of, well, I'm just going to come with a big stake and separate this. It's not as easy as that. You really have to identify much more who you are, and then surrender that, so that you're no longer using that for independence, but you then carry on using that to outwork who you are. So it means you don't stop doing what you're doing, you just do it from a different motivation, if you like, and in a different level of relationship with God, because you being in control stops God being in control. And until I surrender and allow God to be in control, then I'm not going to have the fullness of my relationship with Him, because there are going to be areas where I am still in control. Now, when you're a ruler gift, that's quite difficult. If you're a ruler gift, it's very difficult, because actually bringing order and government is all about what you do. It's just identifying where that is coming from, the soul's motivation rather than the spirit's motivation. And intimacy and relationship and a desire to be proactive about that is, you can speed the process up. I was getting to the point where God was wanting me to come into responsibility in areas that my character would not have allowed me to operate in, so He had to deal with it. And I obviously surrendered to the process, but I didn't know what the process was going to be when I said yes. God just said, well, will you do this? And I said, yes, I'll spend 4 months with you in intimacy. And it was like, I was thinking, wow, I'm going to get some amazing things. And then it was like, oh, what you're inviting me is to come into darkness then? Yeah. Do you trust me in the darkness? Well, I didn't until then I did. When I did, everything changed. So whatever our problem is, or whatever the essence of who we are is, it's all the same basic thing. We have to come to a point of surrender. So that is separated and then reintegrated, that my soul then becomes one with my spirit. And now we worked. It's me. It's me as a living being rather than being a spirit being and a human being. Because that's what brings it all back together. When, as a human being, my spirit is dead, separated from God. I become born again, and therefore I become my spirit becomes alive again. So my spirit being gets reborn, and then I become a living being once they come together again. Well, the enemy obviously tries to stop that integration and oneness by using the soul, because that's the only aspect that he's ever had any connection to. So that's when the flesh wrestles against the spirit, and all those type of things it talks about is the tension of being reintegrated into being one and in oneness and agreement.
Mike, would you say that the Hebrews 4 verse would be a key to dealing with your personal dragons well?
Well, I think it's part of the essence of it. Yeah, I think it's when it gets down to the real core issue. I may have stripped away the surface behaviors. I may have even looked at the aspects of my heart and looked at the iniquity or genetic things within my makeup. But this comes down to having done all that, I still have to surrender who I am in that area of my soul. Now, all the inner healing and all the things we can do in transformation in our soul brings us to that point where we can actually totally yield. And until you remove all the defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms and all the other things, get rid of the familiar spirit, it's very difficult to totally yield. But when I did, it felt so different. I felt so different, and then the level at which my relationship with God then developed, increased dramatically. Because I was not any longer needing those things to bring my own security, my peace, my rest, my joy. Everything comes out of my relationship with God. So truly, He was meeting my needs. But the Hebrews 4:12, dividing soul and spirit, thoughts and intentions of the heart, bone and marrow, is part of that whole overall process. Yeah.
And would you say that also kind of crucifying your main redemptive gifts is also another step? Or
well, yeah, I think in a sense there's a sense that I died on the cross with Jesus. It's like I was crucified with Him. So Galatians 2:20, isn't it? So I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who lives, but Christ lives in me. And that's the I guess the choice. Then you have the daily denying yourself, taking up the cross and following Him. Because in essence, Adam and Eve had never sinned, but they still chose to. So I may deal with that. I've been crucified with Christ, and I am no longer living, but I'm now joined to Him and living. But every day I've got the choice. See, for me, every day I choose to yield and not my will but yours be done. Every day I present myself as a living sacrifice so that I don't choose the wrong path, because the wrong path is still there. At this point in time, every day we get to choose the path to follow the tree of life or to follow the tree of good and evil. Every day. It's a choice. It's offered to us because we have free will. And every day I choose to surrender that free will and decree and declare, not my will but yours be done. It's a daily choice. But that daily choice is on the basis that I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. It's so much easier to make that choice when I've not been motivated by all the things I previously was. You know, so the process helps that daily choice, you know, to be outworked much easier. You know, but for me, it was an event. You know, when God said, "Come into this dark cloud," because now actually I'm going to test your soul and whether our relationship, so that you can actually see what it's based on. And I was surprised and shocked by the level of the lack of trust that I actually had. You know, I had all the trust in the world when I understood what God was doing, and when I didn't understand, all of a sudden the need to understand was the primary motivating force that I had, and that was the dragon's well in me. That was my primary motivating force. I need to know, because I know the whole thing with, you know, having a place in the temple that the enemy dwelled in was the whole picture. When, you know, Nehemiah came to rebuild the temple and actually found that they'd given one of the enemy, I don't know, was it Tobiah or one of them, the place in the temple, you know, the treasury room in the temple, you know, and they'd given him a place to go and squat there. So it's like, you know, what's and when it's talking about the dragon, it's like that. It's just that sort of that primary thing. You know, all the rest of it is secondary to that. And I found that I couldn't deal with that until I dealt with all the rest, really. I'd done a lot of the preparation of gateways and living sacrifice and everything else, you know, and that then, once my ketubah had been made, that was the thing that really triggered it. I had to deal with this now if this was going to be a marriage relationship which was based on trust rather than law. And, you know, and it was, and it changed, and that really began to be outworked in my life, dramatically, really, when I look back and see how I'm living in essence according to my ketubah without ever having to have used it. You know, I don't have to remind God according to my ketubah. It's just I live in that expectation that faith dwells in, that brings the outworking of that in my life. So yeah.
Hi, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation where, you know, you would like to make a decision and God is showing you that the outcome, that when you do this, this is what is going to happen 3 consecutive times, and thereby the thinking of my own fleshy comfort in making that decision, but in the end it became reality because God has seen what is going to happen when I didn't even realize myself, until when it came to my face. Then I now just faced this decision making, which was so kind of difficult and scary for me. But I couldn't make that decision on my own, so I just cry out to him that I know this is what you want me to do, but it's difficult for me to do. Help me, please, Lord, help me. So I was crying for that, and I went to court, and I just asked for the release of the angel to just help me. And because it got to a stage, because I was controlling things, I didn't even realize it. And God was showing me the position of things where I have all this remote control in my hand, in my pocket. It was it was scary. And I left my communication and the link for someone to help me hold it. I said, oh my goodness, what is this? So I knew, you know, I was controlling things, and I just, have to go into his presence to just trust him in everything. It was very difficult, but in the end, when I faced with this challenge, and I just cried on him that, Lord, I can't do it on my own. I've tried, but I could not do it. Please help me. So in the end, drama happened, and victory came over that thing. But I couldn't do it on my own. It was just him that helped me. But I now look at what you've been talking about. It's about maturity. To me, I feel that God is still monitoring me in that way, and He still left me to make that decision, even though I was a bit, kind of not able today, but it still helped me. So because you've been saying that after all this, it will get to another stage where I will be, strong enough to be able to make that decision. And He was showing me the position of my heart, something that I've repented of and I've forgotten about it, and I thought that it was gone until 2 days ago. He brought it back and said, you need to go through this again. I really appreciated it because I never knew that thing is still there. So that's the position in which I am, and I thank you so much for engaging God, the manual, because it's like when we don't go through that manual step by step, we are trying to cut it in the middle, or we're facing with a problem, and we actually be ignorant of going through it step by step. So I've now made myself now to go back properly and start this better thing, because I was going through Familiar yesterday, and I was reading it, and I said, oh my goodness, all this stuff that going on, I have not done it properly. So I'm going to go back to start properly, so that I will not be jumping the gun and not knowing what to do. So I'm really grateful for this wonderful training that you have put together. We just can't mess it up. You just have to start it properly. And that's what I am getting now. And I forgive myself for not kind of doing it properly. So this is what I'm just asking the question of the stage where I am at the moment about decision making.
Yeah, I mean, it is a journey and it is a process. And if we try and shortcut the journey, we'll miss out the stages of that journey that are preparing us for the future. And when it comes to it, in any decision that God asked me to do something and I have to make a decision, now I trust that He's going to bring good out of that decision, even though that may not remove all the obstacles, or they may not, I have to overcome things still. See, when I order my day and I frame my day according to what God has called me to do, I don't try and remove all the obstacles or the problems, because I'm supposed to subdue and rule and grow in maturity by overcoming. I am an overcomer. That's what the Word has said, more than a conqueror. That means that I don't try and create a life of ease without any obstacles. I just establish that I have the power and the authority to overcome every situation and obstacle and bring it into an alignment with God's will and purpose. And I'll grow through those obstacles. And therefore the trials that it says, through many tribulations we enter the kingdom in Acts, I don't try and remove those tribulations. I just make sure that the enemy is not getting any access to it, because I don't want to avoid the things that God has put in my journey that cause me to grow and mature and overcome and get stronger, because He knows exactly what I need when I need it. I just need to follow the journey, and I find that sometimes the decisions that He asks us creates a crisis of faith. Can I believe? Is that possible? If I do this, how is this going to work out? And it's our response to that which indicates the level of maturity, and then the process that we need to go to come into that level of maturity. And we become mature because we learn to overcome, not because we have an easy life.
Yes.
But it takes time, and the reason I've set out the sort of the manual in a sort of systematic way is that I know that if you try and jump into something before you're ready, and not having become built up in your spirit or remove the obstacles in your souls, you can run into problems, like you've said. You know, the reason that those things are there is because probably all of us will have some of those things to outwork in our lives, and so the tools to do them are there to use. And so hearing God's voice is the primary thing in everything, because if we can't hear God's voice, and I know people say, oh, well, Ian says, well, you can't see, and if you can't see, you can't have. But if you can't hear God's voice, you won't even know what he's asking you to see. So it's very important that we develop an intimacy with God, that we know him, and we know when he's speaking to us, because that then will become the foundation of everything else. And I know everyone wants to have visions, but I want to talk to God. I want a relationship. I'm not after the experience. I want the relationship. And for me, the relationship comes from us talking together and fellowship together and having that relationship. Not me having a whole mass of visions or heavenly experiences, but having a relationship with God in which I know his heart and I can hear his voice, and then I can perceive actually what he's asking me to do, which is what seeing is all about. It's the perception of what he's showing me, like Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing. It's that perception I want every day of my life, and that comes basically through the intimacy of relationship.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, okay. All right, well, we'll leave it there.